Evening. So as the world is falling apart around us, I feel quite privileged to be among you. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Boris, for the invitation. I'm gonna talk about someone called M. She's an archaeologist and a collector, and she's been influenced by many of her peers, archaeologists, but also sociologists and artists and ethnopsychiatrists. So I'm going to talk about her career and how she's been influenced by all these different practices. And for the sake of clarity, I'll be reading from her journal directly for the next 20 minutes maximum. So bear with me. My family had been collecting for generations. This was no doubt the seed of my vocation as an archaeologist, unless I should attribute it to my father, who had also made archaeology his passion and profession. My name is M, and I've been an archaeologist for 20 years. With the development of so-called non-invasive technology, my father and I no longer practice exactly the same profession. My father has spent his day down in the earth, bent over objects, stroking them with different brushes, measuring them from every angle. I stood upright. I was aerial, people said. I did not manipulate images directly myself. Members of my team were much more skilled at navigating those drones. But I knew how to observe and analyze the images these robots produced. Those dotted lines, or dots connected by lines, form nothing more but abstract maps to decipher. The passion for archaeological digs that had defined my father's career had also fed colonial history. I refused to take part in it and wanted to turn away from the certainties that had once united my profession. Neither did I place blind trust in the aerial images. Those abstract maps ultimately only determined the contour of a history to be written. They were nothing but avenues to follow, enigmas to elucidate. My discovery with ethnopsychiatry drastically changed my practice. I often went to hear the ethnopsychiatrist called Toby Nathan, who's French, who said that psychological disorder cannot be treated on a couch. His experience with immigrants' population in France convinced him that cultural and political element is necessary to the comprehension and treatment of a psychiatric disorder. In short, an African, a Malaysian, an Indian, and a European will be ill in different ways. And treating them with therapies that take account of their attachment to a group of origins, gods, or ways of understanding the world has generally proved to be more effective. If the patient attributes his or her malaise to a bewitchment, a gene, or an invisible spirit, we must respect this explanation. So finally, it's a matter of an exchange. The patient transmits knowledge to them, meaning doctors and scientists, and they put them in contact with another type of knowledge. I remember going on lectures on Thursday morning in which Toby Nathan relates his patient cases. It was the story, I remember, of a child in France who had incestuous relations with her father. She would usually slip into their bed at night in search of different caresses. And social services no longer knew how to help this family, so they sent them to Dr. Nathan's office at the Hospital d'Evreux in Paris. Nathan was someone who would challenge the usual discourse of anthropology and psychology. To give you an example, he disputed the famous period of sexual latency that is usually claimed to occur from the age of 5 to puberty. In certain traditional society in Indochina, and specifically among the Mojave people in California, Nathan had seen children make love from the age of 5. So ethnopsychiatry, he thought, required the constant questioning of so-called universal views. Ultimately, he said, ethnopsychiatry remains the most effective methodology for the psychosocial care of specific populations, and it is a great tool for dismantling certainties. Another story I remember from another patient, she was a West Indian woman who had a fling with a man and had been suffering over it since then. She felt controlled and possessed by this man who had entered her and seemed not to have left. Nathan explained with the wisdom of an Egyptian rabbi's son that there are 2 ways of resolving the problem. The first is clinical. This woman is insane, so her behavior is abnormal. One therefore chooses to disconnect her through medications that keep her calm and passive. Or one listens to her and tries to reconnect her to her own world. One therefore conducts interviews with her family, her mother, her aunt. There's collective session taking place at the hospital. And interpreters are also asked to take part in the collective session, because every word can open a new avenue to understanding. We listen to their stories, he says. We don't separate the worlds. I did not always remember how these sessions ended. He was always giving a final advice, or better, an instruction to his patients. It was a matter of bringing tradition into the treatment, getting witches, genes, and spirits involved. And he would then sometimes suggest that they make a short trip back to their country of origin to honor the grave of a loved one, or do a deed of some kind. Nathan's approach inspired me for my own field investigation. I did not hold group or family meetings, but I preferred one-on-one interviews to allow for the most unassuming people to talk and to let the invisible come back in. Some colleagues thought that this practice seems from my aerial character. Others suspected I was trying to differentiate myself from my paternal heritage, but left me to do as I wished. I went to meet the people who inhabited my drone images. I found out about their tradition and collected oral stories that might shed light on the enigmas presented by my images. I also worked closely with interpreters. And after these interviews only, those topographical snapshots had more substance, as if I had zoomed in with a magical lens. They were richer, made of steel, of lines, points, but also of attachments. I want to find a framework to decolonize my profession by working in a collaborative way, in the language of people concerned and based on the thoughts of their world. And I know that I'm no longer the only one advocating this approach. I found actually an echo in the work of another archaeologist called Uzma Rizvi, who says that contemporary archaeological practice is shifting from object-based to people-based research, subsequently requiring and creating new methodological approach to studying the past and present. As our lens refocuses, archaeologists are turning to post-colonial frameworks for new field methodologies. Approaches that provide the infrastructure to allow for participatory, collaborative, and interaction-based archaeological projects, thus destabilizing archaeological practice that colonize landscape and people and promote specific types of knowledge of the past through that process. In other words, I did not use object to reconstruct a story, but I used stories to find the objects. These black and white images, those topographical plates, were populated by narratives and anecdotes that revealed the material object. The treasure hunt was written. It was just a matter of going to find them. The dig could therefore begin. As for the last stage of the process, I closed my eyes. I felt powerless with regards to politics and the market, which determined the destination of the object. But I thought the most important thing was to preserve the stories that brought this object to life. Actually, with 3D printing, everything can be identically copied, but immaterial heritage was not well preserved. If those personal accounts, even if subjective, enabled me to preserve the context of the objects, I could completely detach myself from the originals. And I was hoping that this series was shared by the communities I was interviewing. I had not yet found the courage to really confront the issue. When I go to museum, whether it's conserving art, anthropological collection or contemporary art, I often left feeling disappointed and irritated. The whole way of operating needed to be refreshed. Museums have always been organized chronologically, with permanent collections hung according to a timeline. Some contemporary museums, like Tate Modern in London, have experimented thematic hanging that challenge the usual expert's perspective. But in the wings of the large institution, the organization has not changed. Departments have specialist teams that reproduce the usual model, with the world and its things divided in departments by movement, region, and medium. There's an Africa, an Asia, and Middle East committee and experts in sculpture, film, and performances. Like me, they may be all closing their eyes. Uzma Rizvi actually called this epistemic laziness. It is obvious that these broad categories only reproduce a representation of the divided world, a system that perpetuates itself and tells us nothing about the works we are looking at. Actually, a good friend of mine, an artist, Franck Lebovici, likes to say that conceptual art is anything but immaterial. He was actually referring in one of his texts to a famous performance by Chris Burden in '71 called The Shot, and saying that actually this specific action requires a gun, a bullet, the wall of a factory, a camera. Lebovici gives special attention to what a work consists of, along with its material property, its narrative, its objects, its actions. And Tate Modern had consulted him recently about the place that performance should occupy in this divided organization, in their departments. And he responded as follows. Because performances are laden with objects and because the object-based arts are activated via a series of distributed mediation, I fear that a program highlighting the non-art object would simply be retrieving a distinction that in fact obfuscates rather than clarifies the functioning of the artwork. It would thus be far more interesting to try to provide an account of these trajectories and series of mediation. In a sense, I would argue that the ecosystem opens up a new definition of the artwork. If we agree that an artwork cannot be reduced to its materiality, but that we need to grasp its entire ecosystem for it to function properly, then the definition of an artwork stretches accordingly to the scope of its ecosystem. An artwork ecosystem is the complete set of practice that an artist must develop to do what they do, like the biotop of a living organism. We humans require air, water, and a certain temperature to exist, but what would an artwork biotop be? It would comprise practices, daily exercise, assets, gestures, statements, writing, and position-taking, ethical and political, which all determine the way in which artists work, their orientation, their choice of material, and so on. What was the biotope of my discoveries, of my findings? Only the owners of errors could say. I knew that the interview I conducted before each dig described the essential of the biotope of the objects I was archiving. I dreamt that these stories would give rise to new hanging configuration at the museum, or at least that they would find their way onto labels. Near the bottom right corner of a painting or a showcase, instead of reading date, material, place, owner, one could read an anecdote on the usage, gestures, rituals, and forms of attention associated with those objects. One would then learn that objects makes us do things and not the other way around. For example, musical instruments make musicians do things they're not, make objects do things that they're not programmed to. And these objects are not totems. Effect can arise in unpredictable ways. And I think it's sociologist Antoine Aignan who said that the objects we make actually make us in return. So in other words, they escape us. They have their own agency, their ability to act. Objects cannot be reduced to artifacts. They are crossed by a set of mediation that crystallize at some point to form a time capsule. As Antoine Aignan explained during a meeting at the Center of Sociology of Innovation, the crux, the key point is the status given to objects, the fact of not seeing them as external, as fixed data, but as unsettled composites made of links that are established and broken through test, recreating novel composite worlds. Archaeology, which was traditionally a fact-finding discipline, is distancing itself from the discovery of objects as facts, but is seeking to define what objects means to people today, what objects presents in terms of a problem, of a matter. And if we agree that the archaeology is a writing process, and that the writing of science is a poetic question, then it consists in carrying out this transformation in a reversible way, from mediation to object and from objects back to mediation. One must know how to go from solid to a liquid state and vice versa. It is a remediation process that brings out the infinite status of the archaeological finding. The topographical images were made richer by the stories of people I met, and turned into map of material and immaterial history that needed constant reinterpretation. My family had been collecting for generations, and a few years ago I had started buying the work of my contemporaries. It was actually one of artist Mario Garcia Torres' saying that persuaded me to start a collection. And speaking of his own work, he said, I'm in the business of digging art. I don't own art. I take care of it. Collecting is an act of belonging. How one belongs to a story, how does one relate to a story, and how does one activate a story? It is a very intimate act. I had a circle of friends involved in the arts. I followed their advice with the same methodology I apply in my own profession. And so I based my choice on conversation with artists. Their anecdotes guided me towards the object I finally purchased. I was particularly interested in artists who saw art as a form of knowledge and used it to question history, museology, obviously, and that epistemic laziness I knew so well. But the works that really fascinated me were those in which the artist had made a game of free writing and remediation, playing it with an inviolable freedom. They often used narrative and fiction to challenge so-called universal statements. For me, it was all about taking care of these works, which means to conserve them beyond their materiality, with all of their constituent data and the concerns they convey. Sometimes I thought I was a little more than an archaeologist and a collector. I also became a mediator and a translator. And thanks to these works, the world somehow becomes a little more hopeful. And I recall, again, Uzma Rizvi, when she says, "It is only when we start in the future that we allow for radical alternatives to exist, even if only by structuring our political philosophies and culture of hope and change." And I would like to share, to finish, a few of M's collection that I know of. She has a few works by artist Walid Raad. Actually, this one is from 2010, and it's a series of plates that he made, and he says that basically the 3 decades of the Lebanese war have affected not only inhabitants and buildings, but also shapes, lines, forms. And sensing a forthcoming danger, they, the lines and forms and so on, they employ defensive measure to hide and take refuge in unexpected places. And so Walid Raad with this series is himself being excavating these places to find those forms. And that's a work she also have from the Islamic collection at the Louvre. She also has, she's been interested in the work of Imanissa, actually thanks to Bassam El Baroni. She's Imanissa is a translator herself. She operates always transformation from text to images and reversely. And in this series, Lexicon, she's actually not concerned with the artist sort of ecosystem or the ecosystem of the work. She tries to go to the essential of an initial work, in this case called Laboring. I don't think you can actually read the label on the top right. And she makes a sculpture, or she makes another form from this description of a previous work. That's a sculpture from Otobong and Konga. She made from back from a trip in Namibia, where she collected different materials, copper, and made her own mapping of a mine in Namibia. This is a work by Mariana Castillo de Bal. It's a infinite column made of motifs that are based from different artisans in Oaxaca, in Mexico. And it's basically a column of their own language, of form and their culture. This is a work of Tsutan. It's a long-term project he's made on keywords, and trying to come up with new keywords as based from interviews of artists, of farmers, of sociologists. And this is a video she has where you see the artist, and he's basically research to come up with two keywords such as social botany, that's one, or animalistic freedom, I think that's another one. It's a work by Jorge Satorre, Mexican artist as well. It's also based on a museum built by inhabitants in the state of Mexico. So basically the state don't really care about this collection, so the inhabitants have been digging their own ground and keeping all the material they found, ceramics and so on. And the artist has been making copies out of those ceramics and breaking them and then changing their scale so it becomes a completely different form again. And those works travel in different exhibitions internationally, and the originals, of course, stay in this town. I think that's a work from Imanisa again. And the last work, this is a work by artist and musician Tara Katoui. It's called the Rivers Collection. This is an image of different instruments as part of this collection. They're instruments that were made out of the recording. So he reversed the process of instrument making. He started from recording instrument from an anthropological collection in Berlin that he played. They were instruments that were kind of lost in the collection. He played them, recorded them, and then asked instrument maker to build new instruments out of this recording to try to make instruments that could produce the same sound. And this is one of them. And it's a mix of a violin and an instrument I can't pronounce, the hurdy-gurdy. And I'd like to play maybe, yeah, a sound.